Introducing TiE Singapore Huddle Sessions.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sidhi Dhir, and I serve as the Executive Director for TiE Singapore. Welcome all to this month's Huddle, where we would be discussing about the paradigm shift in education, careers, and leadership roles in the post-COVID-19 environment. This Huddle is in collaboration with LCR Capital Partners. Founded by alumni of Harvard Business School, LCR is a globally recognized private investment and advisory services firm serving the needs of families who wish to secure US or European residency through investment. They leverage their specialization in the investment and immigration process needed to secure an EB-5 investment visa, US green card, or a Portugal golden visa. LCR is also one of our strategic alliance partners, enabling thought leadership and insightful discussions in the educational field. Our moderator for the session is Maya Hari. Maya is the Vice President and Managing Director for the APAC region at Twitter. She's also the President of TiE Singapore. Before I hand it over to Maya to introduce the speakers and kickstart the discussion, few housekeeping rules. To ask your questions, please use the Q&A button, either located at the bottom of the screen or at the top. We would discourage typing your questions in the chat box. This recording would be shared with all post the session. And lastly, there is a possibility that there might be connectivity issues or some unwanted background music. So please bear with us if such a thing happens. Over to you, Maya.
Thank you, Sidhi. Hi, everyone. Lovely to have you all here with us in yet another huddle that we have been consistently having wonderful conversations every time we do this every few weeks. So our huddle today is centered around reshaping the future of education, careers, and leadership. A common thread that clearly underpins this segment is massive change and uncertainty that has come about because of COVID. And frankly, tied to that, all of the ensuing restrictions to gathering together, to cross-border travel, coupled with this phenomenal pace of adoption of technology in the current times. So to talk to us and unpack this topic a little bit more, we have with us today two wonderful speakers who know both the careers and the education and the career space intimately. First up, we have Brian Rogove, Brian's the Chief Executive Officer for Lumio Education, a TPG-backed K-12 education platform with significant interest in Southeast Asia in high-quality education. Brian's actually an entrepreneur and an investor, so fits right into the TiE context. Brian, can I hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure, thanks, Maya. And glad to be here today, talking with other folks and having some entrepreneurs on as well. I think, I guess what I would add is I've sort of been in the Asia Pacific region for 20 years and spent the last 15 in Singapore, and most of that time either as an operator in education or investing in education, everything from K-12 to English language training to international education, and a bit of EdTech, and love the space, love the what's going on at the moment. I'm looking forward to talking about that, and glad to be here with everyone today. So,
thank you, Brian, and welcome. Also joining us today as our second speaker is Sherman Baldwin, CEO of LCR Capital Partners. Sherman deserves a very special shout out because it's about 5 a.m. his time right now. So Sherman, you're going to lead the pack on who's going to be brightest and absolutely full of energy today. But Sherman's the CEO of LCR Capital, and you heard a little bit from Sidhi about LCR being a private investment and advisory firm. What I can tell you beyond that is Sherman also teaches innovation and leadership at Yale, and his background has been in global leadership roles at Accenture, serving a lot of Fortune 500 companies and government, etc. But Sherman, we'd love to get a little bit more color from you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and LCR, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Maya. It's great to have the opportunity to speak with all of you. I started my career in the U.S. Navy, so early wake-up calls as part of the training. So I was a U.S. Navy carrier pilot, so I'm very accustomed to operating at 5 a.m. in the morning. As Maya said, I spent a number of years at Accenture. Before that, I was at McKinsey and have had operating and leadership P&L roles at a number of different companies along the way. I've been at LCR Capital Partners for 2 years, became the CEO about a year ago, and very excited to participate today.
Thank you, Sherman. A very warm welcome. And here we thought we were throwing you a curveball with the 5 a.m. call. But great to know that you were made for this. So let's get started. Over the next 30 or so minutes, we want to just dive in and unpack a few questions around just getting to know the space and the shifts and the paradigm shifts that the space is seeing. So let me start with you, Sherman. As countries start to emerge from lockdown and COVID realities are sort of shifting now with easing of certain restrictions, what do you think are the biggest changes in the education and career space today, particularly from the point of view of the Gen Z of today, if you will?
So actually, an experience I just had yesterday, I think, is a great example. I often say to my team that talent cannot hide. And in today's world of connectedness with technology, talent just emerges and rises to the top. And just yesterday, I had a tough decision to make, but I replaced a senior leader in our business who just wasn't doing that great a job, and have moved him and reassigned him to another part of the business, and promoted a young leader in our business who is just on fire and doing great. And everybody sees that, everybody believes that this person is the right person for the job. And we're making a lot of management changes and trying to be agile and adapt to the difficult environment. And as CEO, it's critical to put the right people in the right seats to be successful. And you can't be bashful about making changes. And young people, I think, have a great opportunity today in this challenging environment to show what they've got. And I think people will see in small and large organizations who can adapt and who can be agile and effective in a remote environment. And frankly, I think young people and Gen Zers have to some degree, an advantage in many respects, because they are digital natives. They grew up with the technology and they're very comfortable with it. So use that to your advantage.
Thank you, Sherman. Brian, I'd love your thoughts on this too. What do you think? What are you seeing as the biggest changes in education and careers for the young Generation Z?
Yeah, well, look, it's a big answer, and I only say that because I think it depends on if you focus on really young kids, or you focus on, let's say, students that are in high school or students that are in college. And I guess if you kind of look at a high level, I mean, the more interesting things that are starting to emerge right now is, it's called digitally enabled learning. Is not new, but it's probably gaining momentum quicker than at any time in history. And I think the jury's out on that as to how effective that is. And probably more importantly, I think when you're talking about university education, I think the reality of it is, what's the value for money that folks are facing right now? When you think about, you should be spending $30, $40, $50, $70, $80,000 a year for a virtual education. I think most people would probably say the answer is no. So I do think there's some interesting things that are coming out of this, and some interesting business models that are going to start to evolve. I think one of the things that we're seeing, which is pretty exciting, I guess, not just in this part of the world, but also in the US, from an entrepreneurial perspective in the education space, is online tutoring, online mentoring and coaching. It's particularly been very interesting through COVID, because the reality of it is, without a lot of the brick and mortar or face-to-face tutors, or even face-to-face learning, there's been a huge uptick in demand for virtual tutors. And let's say prior to COVID, there was a big question mark around I guess you'd call the viability of these businesses, where they would be, the lifetime value of the customer relative to acquiring the customer was not moving in the right direction. And that seems to have moved in the right direction. Now, I think the interesting thing, at least for some of the EdTech models, will be to see, are they able to retain clients now going forward as things start to reopen? And look, even just today in Malaysia, they've just now, as of 4 o'clock today, announced that schools will be reopening. So that's a good thing. Obviously, Singapore we're reopened, and other parts of the world are starting to reopen, and yet some are closing again in parts of the United States and in Beijing. So I think we're seeing a pretty interesting time, and I think we're going to see technology, but I also think we're going to see much more of a personalization of the learning journey going forward and blended learning.
Let me get you to expand some of your thoughts there, Brian. As you think about, educational institutions, I mean, we see people, graduates from high school at crossroads today, not knowing what to do next for this summer, this year, next year. How do you see the educational institutions playing their part? How are they adapting? Are they adapting fast enough to the needs of today? And beyond sort of online tutoring and online schooling, what other bigger, broader changes do they need to think about?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess, if you think about universities, and I'll focus on them for a second, because I think when you think about the most drastic changes, probably the biggest disruption and the biggest losers in the entire battle will be the post-secondary education. I think, not just in the United States, but even in Australia and elsewhere, you're going to see very significant shutdowns of universities that don't have economically feasible models, and that particularly is what you call lower tier universities. The top universities will always do well. As I think I may have said to you the other day, if you are a graduating senior, this is the best chance in history of getting into a top 25 university. The yields are very poor. They are going to their second and third tier wait list. So there is no better time to be applying to a top tier school right now. There's also no guarantee that you will go to that school in person in the fall, which is part of the reason why it's your best opportunity of getting in. But that opens up opportunities, but it also means that we're going to see, let's see, there's 3,200 universities in the United States. It wouldn't surprise me if in the next 2 years, 10% of those shut down permanently and or consolidated. You're already starting to see a lot more post-secondary education moving online. And I think what you will rapidly start to see is a pricing dynamic that will change. The positive, I guess, aspect of that is that it could make post-secondary education more affordable. It may become a blended learning model where you don't need all the whiz-bang facilities and campus. You have most of your lessons delivered virtually and maybe a few in-person things. That said, having gone through at least the US university system, I think part of what you do pay for is the non-academic part and the social part, and I think that'll be tough to replicate virtually. So I would expect a lot of disruption there. And I guess the other thing, thinking about people that are particularly, let's call it in their last year or two of high school, I think you're going to see a lot of people choose almost historically, let's say in the US or the UK, to do gap years, which aren't that common in the US and are more so overseas, as people try to figure out what it is they want to do. And I think you'll see many interesting business models come from this, not just in education, but otherwise, of really personalizing the learning journey. And I think it's going to be a pretty exciting time.
Sherman, if I could, sitting at the vantage point that you are, because of LCR, you sort of see what the cross-border talent flows look like and the cross-border student flows look like. Is that changing significantly, not just because of COVID, but we're also in a lot of macroeconomic and geopolitical issues. So how do you see that changing in people sort of thinking about working and studying across the world?
I think it's changing dramatically, both because of COVID and because of the different political things afoot. I mean, it's no secret that the current administration is at odds with China. Chinese students represent the largest population of international students in the US. I think that's going to decrease dramatically over the next few years, and there's a number of underlying reasons for that. The COVID impact, I think, is very difficult to measure at this point. Universities, Scott Galloway from NYU is a very outspoken university professor. Many of you have heard his blog and his podcast. If you haven't, I recommend you look them up. It's called No Mercy, No Malice. and I read them regularly. And he's got a very strong point of view that, frankly, universities should not be opening up in the fall because of the COVID risk. And obviously, this is a very hot debate topic, but he argues that, frankly, the CFOs of many universities are driving the decision making for financial reasons to get the families' deposits in and secure the financial balance sheet, if you will, of the university before they maybe do a pivot in the late summer, early fall to more of an online environment. So it's very hard to know what's going to happen. Each state in the United States is handling things a bit differently. Each university is handling them differently. And so it's a very uncertain environment, and one that, we have two children that are out of college now, but one that's in a boarding school, and the boarding school faces exactly the same situation. And my wife and I are debating what the right thing to do about writing the deposit check is. So it's a tricky time, and I think everybody's got to just stay well informed and keep an eye on the news and what your university's doing. But it's a very uncertain time.
Thank you, Sherman. And if I could get you to unpack a little bit more, if I think about the Singapore-based audience, their interest in education, particularly higher university education, tends to be the US, UK, Canada, Australia. How is it? We've talked a lot about the US, but what are the advantages of one versus the other? Does that change in the current scenario? Do you see the different countries start to play a different role as destination?
Well, I know less about Australia and Canada, but from a US and a European perspective, most of our client families are focused on the US or on Europe. And, both situations are still, I think, extremely welcoming and great opportunities for families. I mean, there's no question that the basis of a liberal arts education in Europe or in the US, I think, is a great foundation for future leaders. I think one of the challenges of a focused technical education is it doesn't give the student the breadth of experience and the breadth of knowledge that very focused technical training does. And the world needs engineers like never before, and STEM is a critical feature. But I like the acronym STEAM, which weaves in the notion of the arts as well, and a well-balanced engineer that has a broad knowledge of liberal arts, or at least some knowledge of liberal arts, I think is going to be a much more capable leader going forward.
Thank you. And let me switch tracks a little bit. And technology is at the very heart of the TiE audience always. And so let me check in with you, Brian. You talked a little bit about some of the basic models around technology-aided learning in educational institutions. What is the role, do you think, broader than, do you think technology becomes a substitute over time to in-person learning, connection, etc., or are there other business models to find as a hybrid reality? I'd love to hear your thoughts a little bit more on the technology piece of this. Sure.
I'll say it depends, and I'll come back to that in a second, but I'm chuckling a little bit because I can remember over many years, especially as I was involved with K-12 education, I would have people say to me, aren't you worried about being in brick and mortar K-12 education? Isn't technology going to replace, brick and mortar schools? And let me just tell you something, as a parent of 3 children who had them all home for 3 months during COVID, if you ask any parent that has any child who was home during 3 months of home-based learning, no one believes now that, at least in the K-12 space, that virtual learning or home-based learning is a sustainable model. In fact, I think everyone was celebrating to push their kids out the door as quickly as they possibly could when home-based learning ended. That said, and all joking aside, what I would say is that I think it depends on the grade level. So as an example, I think when you're thinking about early childhood education or even primary school or elementary school, very difficult, and frankly, most parents don't want a lot of technology outside of helping to support face-to-face learning. However, I think what we will see more of, and I think this is a net positive, particularly as it comes to preparation for university or preparation for vocation post school, is that you will see technology as a tool to help, again, I believe, personalize the learning journey for students, particularly who are older in the equivalent of American high school, grades 9 to 12, where you'll have a combination of, maybe you don't have to be in class every day. You have some face-to-face, you maybe have some group projects that you work on together. You have some bit of remote-based learning, some bit of learning that is remote. And I think the interesting thing about that is that it opens up a whole new world of opportunities for high school students, because that means they can tap into rich content. I actually think you will see at least the more progressive high schools, whether they're private schools or public schools, look at partnering with universities to offer university-based courses to high schoolers, which some of them do today, but the access from a digital perspective is much more interesting. And I would say that I see that becoming more prevalent, in particular because universities are going to be chasing for additional revenue streams as the kind of post-COVID reality sort of sets in. And that's, I think, going to really open up some very interesting opportunities for technology to play a role. I guess what I would also say related to that is, as it at least relates to university education, you have always seen online universities in the last 10 years. You have OPMs, the TiEs of the world, the Noodles of the world. I think you'll see that model disrupted, where the cost of education is going to be driven down. And I think that's a net positive. I think it will cause some universities to rethink some of the cost side of their models. But I think, again, if you can lower the cost of post-secondary education and ultimately gives you more access, I go back to what I've said many times to others, which is that the benefit of a post-secondary education is to improve the lifetime value of one's earnings. That's why you make the investment, or your parents make the investment, or you take out debt for the investment, is that time after time, looking at decades and decades of research that's publicly available, by the way, you can kind of look at outcomes and the lifetime value of earnings by alumni of schools, and it is still a great return on investment. And the more affordable we can make it, the better it is for others to increase their lifetime value of earnings. And to Sherman's point, we need more engineers. We need more people that have STEAM backgrounds, that have the combination of those soft skills, grit, curiosity, adaptability, all would be very relevant in the COVID world today, and the academic skills. So we really need to see the combination of that going forward. And if technology can enable that, which I believe it can, it's really going to be beneficial to all the students.
Great. Sherman, you've been teaching leadership and innovation at Yale. So if I draw from your experience there, we've talked a lot about sort of higher secondary and undergrad education. We've implied that sort of age group, if you will. What does this mean for professional education, for MBAs, for leadership education in the current scenario? Do we, like in other crises, do we expect people to flock to MBA schools when there's a financial crisis, or is it different this time? And what's the role that, if anything, that technology has to play in that?
Well, I certainly think that during a financial crisis, as we saw in 2008, 2009, and now again, it seems like every decade or so, we need to expect one, sadly. I think that people will flock back to school, and graduate school is a great transition in a career. It's a great opportunity to do something different, to learn and pick up new skills. What I've found, both as a leader of young people and then hearing from young people, what they're looking for. An author that I have read quite a lot is a fellow named Daniel Pink, and I think he's a very thoughtful management writer. And he's identified 3 things that he really believes that leaders need to engage young people with, and it's mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And I think that it has really rung true to me as a leader in my business. And I saw it in particular at Accenture, where I was leading very large groups of young people. And the notion of mastery is that young leaders and young people and young post-MBA grads they want to dig into something. They want to get really good at something. They want to develop a skill. Nobody's looking for a career that will span 30 years at one institution. They're looking for a tour of duty where they can learn and really deepen a skill and a capability that they can take with them as they go on to their next tour of duty, if you will. Autonomy is also critical. They don't want a manager who's hovering over them. They want to be given enough rope to hang themselves, and sometimes they hang themselves, and that's unfortunate. But you need to be able to give them space. You need to be able to tell them not exactly what to do or how to do it. Not how to do it, but what the outcome is that you want, and allow them the autonomy and the freedom and the creativity, because they might come up with a much better way to get it done than you'd ever envisioned. And the last thing that is critically important, I find, to young people is this notion of purpose. And our company is very mission based, and we're about helping global families immigrate to a new and a better life. And it's a very exciting mission. And we really, our people gain a lot of deep positive satisfaction out of serving these clients and helping them achieve their dreams. And so if your business has a deeper purpose to it, and any business can, because you can define that as the leader, that's going to be very appealing to young post-MBA people.
That's great. We have a couple of questions. I'm going to switch over, if you both don't mind, to some questions from the audience. Thank you to the audience members that sent them in. And if there are more questions, we probably have the next 5 or 7 minutes to answer some of these. So this is your chance. One question that came in is around, will there be a change in pattern of study? So if, will skills take over regular academia qualifications? So things like micro-credentials, and will that sort of substitute for degrees, I guess, is a good way to think about it. And if so, with skills, what should people be focusing on? What should entrepreneurs be building around?
Yeah. Happy to take that one, if you want my.
Yeah, go for it, Brent.
So look, the biggest issue, first of all, I guess the simple answer is yes, we will see that. We're already seeing micro-credentials. We're also seeing different type of vocational credentials. Ultimately, the whole issue is credentialing, right? Like you go back to, one of the things I said earlier about, university degrees. I mean, ultimately, what are you buying? You can get the content anywhere. You can get it for free right now, online. You can take all the same Harvard courses you want to take for free. Now, the problem is you're not going to get a degree from Harvard, and you can't represent that you have a degree from Harvard, but you can get exactly the same content, watch all those courses for free or for a very nominal amount of money. The issue is ultimately what you're paying for is that credential, that piece of paper, which gives you that credential, and that is ultimately good, bad, or indifferent. Part of the issue with the university system today, which is that particularly universities that have been around for a very long time, or top universities, there's great experiences going there. The content side you can get anywhere, you can watch remotely. You could argue whether or not that's different from a pedagogy perspective. But I do think what you will see over time, just in terms of the needs of the market, the demand that is out there for, as Sherman put it, for whether it's engineers, whether it's coders, the reality is, do you need to go to a 4-year university or a 3-year university or a 2-year university to learn very trade-specific skills? Look, I have a few friends that through COVID were bored and decided to do the Harvard computer science class, and they learned how to code. Now they're like in their 40s and 50s. They're not going to use it for anything, but they were interested in doing it. And I guess the point is that you can find these skills. The issue will be, particularly for the first employer, is that credential good enough? It's as much, this is where we're tying in the employers is as important as, kind of changing the system. I think we're lucky in this part of the world insofar as, there's such a gap in the demand for talent and the availability of talent. And when I think of some of the markets in Southeast Asia as an example, if I think of Vietnam, or I think of some of the more, emerging markets, Myanmar, Cambodia, there just simply is not the level of post-secondary education, even vocational training. And I'm talking not even, really technical skills, but let's say, well, you could argue nursing is very technical. Nursing, medical, coding. They don't, these students don't need to, go to an overseas university. They don't even need to go to a 4-year, or 2-year, or 3-year university in their country. They need very specific vocational skills and credentials that allow them to, embark on their career journey and start earning a living. And I do think that there's an opportunity, particularly in Southeast Asia, to use a combination of technology and some face-to-face learning that will provide that access. And when I look at markets like Vietnam as an example, I get excited about the vocational element of things, because I think there's an affordability issue. You have still millions of people that need a job, and they don't have the money. They're not going to go to an overseas university. They can't even go to a good private university or public university in Vietnam. But if they had 12, 18 months of coding, Python or something else, they can get a job. They can, do the same thing if they want to be a medical technician or hospitality training. And the reality of it is that's where a vast majority of these opportunities are coming about, particularly in our part of the world.
No, it makes a ton of sense.
If I can just quickly build on, could I just build on something that Brian said? Is a very thoughtful answer. I just would add that I think there's going to be two things that happen. There's going to be a widening of the gap between the very top of the pyramid universities and everybody else. And I think there's going to be a widening of the base. And what's wonderful about technology is it's going to enable greater access, as Brian was just talking about. And I think that's fantastic. And more people are going to be able to get educated. More people are going to be able to get the credentials. And even if they don't have the credentials, get a specific skill good enough to convince an employer that they're hireable. The widening of the gap, though, is going to be very significant, where you have the very top universities. At Yale, I was teaching for the past 4 years a small class of 18 students, and that kind of personal touch and interaction with a very small group of students is a very powerful educational experience for the students, for myself. I mean, it creates a mix, and Yale can afford to do that, and not every school can afford to do that. And so I think people that can get access to that top are going to continue to have a differentiated experience, and that gap is probably going to only widen.
That's great, thank you. What is as we think about vocational training, there's another question here. Just thinking about the focus from the larger world today around vocational training is larger than ever. So does it find acceptability? Is this the new normal, or is it just that we're in that phase because we're all stuck at home or working from home to the large part? And are we substituting use of time? Or is this a big shift for vocational training as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I covered it a little bit in the last answer, insofar as I think you were seeing anyway before COVID a rise in the need and demand for vocational training, probably in different parts of the world. Maybe less so in the United States, although one could argue that probably more is needed there. But I think particularly in markets, if I would just look at Southeast Asia again as something that's, I guess, relevant to a lot of our audience. There are markets, again, I don't continue to pick on Vietnam, other than, it's a great market, and it is a market that is in vast need of more vocational training. The Philippines as well, and actually there's some really good examples of some institutions in the Philippines doing fantastic vocational training, supporting the BPO industry. You see a bit of that as well in India. And I think, in particular for, the more, quote unquote, emerging markets in Southeast Asia, which I mentioned, whether it's Myanmar, whether it's Cambodia, again, there's going to be a very big skills gap, as there already is. Knowing some folks who are in that part of the world, if they are able to, provide a solution, whether it's brick and mortar or digital, to help, bridge that gap, it's going to make a big difference in the development of the country and in the income generation of the population there. They don't need to have an elaborate university system to do that. And vocational training will work very well, particularly at this stage of the development of the economies.
Sherman, the final question is from the audience is here for you, focused a little bit more on LCR. They'd love to know LCR's current and future EdTech focus. If you want to comment on that.
I'm sorry, Maya, you said EdTech focus?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. A high percentage of our families, our client families, are making their investment in EB5 because of their children. And given the education of our team, which is predominantly from Ivy League schools, we value education significantly, and that's a big part of how we market ourselves, is understanding the value of education and understanding the importance of it. I think in terms of a ed tech, position or strategy per se, I can't say we really think of it that way. We think of it more as education is constantly evolving. It's critically important to being a strong leader and a strong contributing citizen. Brian's made many excellent points throughout the course of the huddle today about the evolving situation in education and the impact of technology. Technology is going to be at the core of education going forward. However, nobody can replicate in a setting like we're on today, the setting of being in person. And humans are social creatures, and education is about sitting in the room with someone more learned and experienced than you are, and learning from them, and answering questions, and reading and solving problems, and creating new engineered solutions. So that physical presence, we all have to be honest with each other. We long for that, and we can't wait for that to come back. And I think some students will experience that this fall. Some will be doing things more online, and we're all incredibly excited. I think one of the questions I was asked in our prep session was, what should entrepreneurs be, sorting out, and what should be at the top of the list? And the answer to me is obvious. The top 5 answers are solving COVID. Who's going to find the vaccine? Who's going to find the technologies that help us cure and provide therapies to people? Because we all want to get back together, and we all want to be in the classroom together. And technology, that will be a technology solution that will enable us to all come back together.
Thank you, Sherman. You preempted my final closing question, which was, what do we want entrepreneurs to be thinking about and building? You're right.
So sorry.
No, not at all. Your top 5 answers are vaccine for COVID. Fantastic. Brian, do you want to close us out? What do you want to see entrepreneurs build in this space, or what do you think are problems we haven't solved yet?
Well, I'm hopeful that they solve Sherman's point, which is that they either get a vaccine or a cure as quickly as possible, so we can get some sense of normalcy. But look, I guess I would close in this, which is that I think in times of crisis, whether macroeconomic or other, as we have today, this is when some of the greatest ideas come out. This is when some of the greatest innovation comes out. And so I guess I'm not even cautiously optimistic. I'm extremely optimistic and excited to see what comes out over the coming months and years as a result of this crisis. I think we're going to see some really interesting business models. I think we're going to see some businesses fail, but that's okay. I mean, because as every great entrepreneur knows, you learn a lot more from your failures than you do your successes. So I hope to see lots of failures and lots of successes over the coming months and years. But I'm really excited. I think this will create an unprecedented level of development because it's not a normal crisis. It's one where we're developing new habits and new behaviors. some of which could be permanent. And I think that is particularly going to have an impact on a consumer basis. And so I'm very excited to see what comes out.
Awesome. And you're actively investing in this space, aren't you, Brian?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome.
That's why I'm really looking forward to seeing some interesting ideas.
Awesome. So for the audience, if you guys are listening in and wanna pick Brian's brain on this in the future, you know, get in touch with him. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Sherman. Really appreciate you guys spending the time here, and really great to hear your insights. And I will say my kids rushed back to school for 3 days, and it's a school, funnily enough, that Brian Rogove founded. So there's a nice way to end that story and leave this huddle here. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks Maya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Sidhi.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
all.
you so much, Maya. Brian, Sherman, Maya, this was an insightful discussion. And I'm sure our audience here would have more questions following this session. So everyone who joined us this evening, if you have more questions, please share it with us and we'll make sure the speakers get that. Thank you again, folks. And please join us next month, first Wednesday, where the topic would be investments and the ecosystem and support around investments for startups. So stay tuned and see you next month. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Bye.